we just generally ask that, like, is it a leftist film? That's not like makes it good or bad. Just like we're just taking the temperature of the film.
Is it an explicitly leftist film? This is explicitly leftist podcast.
It's a question we're going to ask.
There is no left Hollywood. There's liberal Hollywood, and the right likes to conflate these things.
What a glorious time.
You mean peak COVID?
All right, well, when you put it that way.
What a glorious, lots of free time to watch movies and record time, for sure. We're already up to speed. We know what's going on here. We're just waiting for him to get in there and strangle him with his dick again. So let's get to that scene.
Let's do this.
I don't know what his politics were at this point. I mean, I know he sort of gets all Maoist-y when everybody gets Maoist-y, but I mean, who didn't?
Okay. Oh, the 58 coup. Okay,
yeah.
Sorry. That's not CIA.
This is a werewolf episode, God damn it.
Just not the one you were hoping for.
Yeah, and when that happens, when the werewolf comes out, you're like, God damn, all right, this movie's awesome.
Victor Ostrovsky, the screenwriter on that, former Mossad agent.
Oh, wow.
Not sure what needs to be unpacked there, but...
Yeah, I'm sure there's plenty of fuckery here. How many people have you tortured?
Well, that doesn't really change how fucked the system is. We don't have time for baby steps right now.
Because when I watch a Godard movie, I kind of like, this is very smart. I'm very impressed with your form. I want to slap you. You feel so fucking smug.
Well, do you think this is a leftist film?
No, not at all. We're going to have to atone for this movie.
Lead a open rebellion, then the camp gets napalmed, and then revolution, I guess? Fuck capitalism. Fuck all of this stuff.
Welcome one, welcome all to the Politics of Cinema. On this show, we believe films are never neutral. There's an artistic and a political message captured in every film, in every time period, in every country, and we here are on the lookout for all of it. My name is Aaron Spears.
And my name is Isaac Miller, and this episode, we're celebrating Halloween by talking about werewolves.
Oh, you wish.
We're not talking about werewolves, because there's no justice in this world. But we will be talking about real world horror, right? In film form. We're going to be talking about punks versus Nazis in 2015's Green Room.
Indeed. Written and directed by Jeremy Saulnier, who, in reading some interviews, found out is a veteran of I think he was in the DC area punk scene as a kid. So kind of those cases of writing an atmosphere, a milieu that he is familiar with, which I think shows and comes through in some of the little details here in this particular story. I have a question for you about this movie, Isaac. What? I know that multiple genres can apply, but like, what genre do you place this movie in? Is it horror?
I mean, this is our Halloween episode, so it should be horror.
Okay.
That's, not actually a reason to call it horror. I mean, I think it could certainly count as a type of horror movie.
I think it does too. For some reason, watching it this time though, I was getting more thriller vibe because like the way Jeremy amps up like the tension and the will they escape, won't they escape kind of story to it. It had more thriller to me. And then I kept thinking, I think some movies get the horror label or moniker because of levels of violence that they depict. I think it's a very realistic depiction of violence in this movie. Doesn't shy away from it, but I don't think he also goes overboard with the violence. I think he keeps it very grounded.
Right.
Here, nothing seems too outlandish or gore for the sake of gore, even in this particular case. But it came up to me because on Letterboxd, I'm often doing, I'll click genres like, oh, how did this get classified? And I don't know what the criteria is for Letterboxd, but they have this listed as crime, horror, thriller, and crime just did not enter didn't enter the conversation in my head for this movie at all. But okay,
I mean, sure, we could go for that.
Is the crime siphoning gas in the opening? Oh, it's probably like the murder. I guess they probably kicks it off.
Yeah, it's the murder.
And everything that ensues, I guess. But all right, fine. It works as a crime film, I guess.
There is crime in this movie.
My other question was, did you get to see this in a theatrical environment?
I did.
Did you have a crowd with you?
Not really. And I watched it with a friend who just wasn't super into it.
Okay.
Which was sort of unfortunate. So that sort of sort of knocked it off a little bit for me.
Interesting. I I did. I also watched it in the theater environment, but it was when we were working at the art house, and I just stayed after after work and watched it. But I did that because I had seen, we do walkthroughs, make sure everybody's, behaving, everything looks good on screen, sound is good, all that stuff. And every time I went through, I was just like, oh my God, I need to see this. And I would just, linger and watch the crowd reacting to the movie. Granted, it's a type of movie that has a better crowd reaction if you're seeing a late show, I think, than if you're seeing it at like a matinee on a Wednesday afternoon. But I remember the crowds being pretty into it, and like it seemed like it was a pretty good time in the theater if you had a crowd with you.
Well, that's just it. With the right crowd, this is like a fantastic movie, right? This is an amazing midnight movie.
Yeah.
And yeah, no, I mean, I was just thinking about you saying like, the gore is over the top. I mean, yeah, I think it's all realistic.
I maybe over the top's the wrong word, because some of it is like, it's very gross in certain cases. But it doesn't seem like, I don't know, like Eli Roth gore, where you're like, oh, okay, why do we need to see, like, we don't see like a head exploding because they get a point blank shot with a shotgun or something, like there's, arm gets cut up, there's, dog attacks and bites and fights, and there are some headshots, but it doesn't seem like gore, like in the Saw level, like for the sake of gore. Does that make sense? I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, there's shocking moments.
Yeah.
There's definitely like, I mean, yeah, there's incredible shocking moments.
And it would gross some people out, I would imagine, especially if you don't watch too many like movies with horror level violence, I guess. But compared to, say, like, I don't know, I was thinking like a Pulp Fiction or a Once Upon a Time in Hollywood level of violence, like, I don't know, Tarantino's level, I think, goes a little bit more to the point of comedy sometimes, whereas this still felt very grounded in what would that do? What would that look like? To me, at least. But anyway, I don't want to get too bogged down in, the horror and the gore to the thing. But I just thought that was kind of interesting because in my head, I had it pegged as like, oh, it's a horror film. But I was like, nah, it kind of feels more like a thriller with horror level violence to me. But I don't want to nitpick the genre tags on Letterboxd necessarily. Just something I always kind of look at just to see my reaction versus what the actual applications are here. I guess we should say, too, just real quick ahead of time, that Jeremy Saulnier, it was his, I think, third feature film. He did Blue Ruin in 2013, which really caught on critically, and since it was made on a low enough budget, was considered, an art house hit. He did one called Murder Party in 2007, which I still haven't watched, but is officially his first feature film. That one is a bit more specifically, from what I've read, in the comedy horror vein. So he's not afraid to step into the horror waters the way some other, directors are like, well, I don't want to do horror or whatever. And then he did, so Green Room is his third, and then he did another one with Jeffrey Wright as a star, which I like quite a bit, but I've only seen the one time, Hold the Dark, in 2018. So he skewed away from the color labels of Blue Ruin and Green Room for his fourth feature film, Hold the Dark.
I mean, it's dark, I guess.
Well, they all have an interesting theme of like humans, specifically, I guess, in three of those. Although Green Room has an ensemble cast, mostly like men and violence within the environment that they are either trapped in or decide to put themselves into. So loose theme there, but
right.
I guess we should probably mention if folks have not seen it. Green Room is a very, very DIY punk band, is wrapping up their tour. They are a DC punk band called Ain't Rights, and they are wrapping up their tour in the Pacific Northwest. They play one last gig, which I feel like is it like in a Mexican restaurant for like three people?
No, it's like a local diner.
Local diner, okay.
Well, basically, the original show gets canceled, and so like the DIY like college radio guy who got them their job is like, well, I've got a backup, and it's like
the diner.
Yeah.
Yeah, the local, I guess, quote unquote DJ. They don't use the word podcaster, which I kind of appreciated. He's like recording them for a radio interview. His name is Tad, which I don't know why that kind of cracked me up, but his name is Tad. So yeah, he gets them booked this restaurant gig. I think the kind of joke of it is when they're passing out, like dividing up the money from the gig, that everybody makes like $6 or something. It's a few singles is all everybody in the band is making. Tad makes it up to them as best he can. They sit down and do an interview with him also. And then he says, "Oh, it's like, is it his cousin, or he knows somebody who knows somebody who could get him another gig on their way back, because they made no money on this leg, finishing up their tour. They take this one last gig kind of thing, and this is where they head out into the Patrick Stewart run, white supremacist neo-Nazi barn / bar / club / drug lab in the basement, out in the woods in the Pacific Northwest. They realize what they're in for pretty early on when they arrive in the green room and see a Confederate flag, and they realize, oh, there's a bunch of skinhead Nazi oi punks here. Great. And their reaction is the first song of their set is the cover of Dead Kennedys' Nazi Punks Fuck Off, which does not go over too well.
That does seem like a pretty unwise choice. I mean, they know that they're going to a Nazi club, because I mean he tells them before they get there that that's what this is going to be.
Well, I wanted to ask you about this, but let me do the quick wrap up on the plot first, because his comment is actually pretty specific, and I wrote it down because I wanted to ask you about it, because I thought it gave me a chuckle. But yeah, they end up wrapping up their set, and then as someone forgets their phone in the green room, Anton Yelchin's character, Pat, he's like, "Oh, I'll go get it." And as he goes into the green room, he sees body on the floor, knife in her head, some Nazis around, and clearly a murder has happened. He's like, "Oh, fuck." And then the Nazis are like, "Well, we can't let these people leave now because they just saw a murder." And that's when the main plot really, well, I guess Act 2 and 3 really kick in. And is our beloved band, the audience characters here, the Ain't Rights, are they going to be able to get out of the Nazi compound when they are locked themselves in the green room? Can they get their way out safely and get back on the road?
Okay, I'm with the Ain't Rights from Washington, D.C. You guys are hard to find. Want no social media presence?
The music is shared live. It's time and aggression. You gotta be there.
All right. I can get you guys a solid gig. Matinee tomorrow, doors at 1, you guys are on at 3.
Gentlemen, you're trapped. Things have gone south. It won't end well.
You can't keep us here, man. You gotta let us go. We're not keeping you. You're just staying.
Shoot who is left. Let him bleed.
Get ready to run.
Here we go.
So if you haven't seen the movie and you don't want spoilers, we will be discussing, whether or not they are successful. So at that point, our usual up top, we are going to talk about the whole film, warning ahead of time.
Right.
But before we get to do they make it out or not, that opening bit that Tad's comment, he says, "I got a gig for you." The place, they're right wing, technically ultra left, is his direct quote.
Mm.
And I found that interesting because I feel like that feeds into, or that's lifted from that I find kind of dubious political argument that if you go far enough to the left, you end up on the right wing, and it's like a ring of political ideology rather than like a scale. So if you go far enough to the left, you're just going to end up on the far right. And you're like, that sounds like you're describing the roads in Pleasantville. I don't think that, it's not the way I kind of look at politics, I guess.
I don't think that's what that means. It might mean, it's probably speaking to the type of neo-Nazi you're dealing with. I don't know enough about this to quite say.
Well, part of me bringing that up was the director words it that way on the commentary, that if you go far enough on the left, you end up on the far right.
Really? That's what he says. Here's the thing. There is such a thing as red brownism, where this happens with Stalinists. I think a lot of people in the old anti-war movement at this point, where, basically if you believed in ethnonationalism or whatever, or you operate through conspiracy theories, you work your way around to the right. And
Okay.
this is actually a pretty serious problem. You'll find it more in Europe and Eastern Europe, but you find it here in the US as well, where basically, red, the left, works its way to brown, the right. So that can happen.
Oh, okay. I see what you mean.
And you can find, I think that the Trump years broke a lot of people's brains. You find it with a lot of the sort of post Bernie or Bernie era sort of like online political personalities. I mean, Jimmy Dore, for instance, right? Jimmy Dore is a right winger, right?
Yeah. Sorry, I one of the first podcasts I ever listened to was Comedy and Everything Else that he did with like Todd Glass and I think somebody else, and it was good like comedy stuff. And he was just your typical liberal Democrat kind of personality. And then I completely fell off with him until he started popping up on some of the right wing watch blogs and stuff that I look at, and I was like, he's a right winger. And then I checked in, I was like, holy shit,
Right.
he lost his
You'll
mind.
find on the absolute fringes of the American left, you will find something like a patriotic socialist, who are basically cosplayers for Soviet style looking things, plus, fascism. Like, I mean, this stuff shows up. It exists. There's
Yeah.
more of it in other places. I think, especially sort of degenerated Stalinism in this point. I mean, I don't really consider Stalinism a functional part of the left anyway, but like you can easily, I mean, you'll find, some of the Stalinist parties in Europe, supporting Russia in the Ukraine war. And it's like, well, this is Russia is like a far right nationalist state. So it's like, well, if you're following a state's line, you're going to end up in this place,
Yeah.
But with Nazism, I mean, there is, the SA, which is the original street fighting organization of the Nazi Party, had people who took the socialist part of National Socialism seriously. I mean, what sort of German right wingers in the interwar period mean by socialism is actually a hyper hierarchical, like, nationalist ordered society. And so, like, it does not actually mean socialism in the sense that, like, socialists tend to mean it. But they took a little bit more of that seriously, and then, they had to be murdered, in the Night of the Long Knives, right? Like, they had to be crushed. So there is, so you'll find, I mean, Nazis are about as far right as you can get, but sometimes there's attempts. Well, you see this with, what is it, Compact Magazine now? They sort of try to steal ideas from the left in terms of sort of left economic ideas and combine them with like race theory.
Oh.
I mean, this stuff, yeah. I mean, this is, now ultimately, are they anti-capitalist? No. Nazism is, profoundly revitalizing for capitalism in Germany and fascists in power. That's, but like, I don't know what I thought when he said that there was some sort of technical meaning within the spectrum of neo-Nazi organizations. But if that's what he meant by it and it's not that, then that's pretty weak.
Well, I mean, that's literally just what he said in the movie. So I wrote down the quote because I was like, well, that's kind of an interesting way to have that perspective. But then it was more like when I was listening to the commentary track and read some interviews with the writer director that I was like, is that actually what he means? Because that's fine. Like that's his political, that's the way he pictures like a political spectrum within the United States. But that just didn't quite ring true to me, I guess, personally.
It doesn't ring true if that's what he means.
But that can also be a character's point of view who like it's an interesting thing to say in service of a narrative that is going to send these punks who are not, they're clearly not like right-wing punks into this particular environment. And it's kind of an interesting, not like red herring, but it's an interesting kind of harbinger of like things to come. You're like, oh, wait, where are you going into here? Although to be honest, though, I mean, if you've seen the trailer for it or read the synopsis, you know what's coming their way. So that line's really only a good setup for people that haven't heard anything about the movie and somehow are watching it.
I mean, part of it, let's take a moment here. I mean, they're not, one of them has an anarchist tattoo. They aren't anarchist punks per se. They're not political punks, right? I mean, to be totally honest, if they were, they wouldn't have taken the show, even without money. They obviously don't like racists, and we'll see that when we talk about their reaction to Imogen Poots' character, and Nazi punks fuck off. I mean, it's not like they don't. It's I think they're well aware of these things. It's just they're not like, they don't seem like a particularly political crew,
right?
But they don't fucking like Nazis.
Right, and the only thing which is also another, I think, interesting way to structure this movie, the only real time you get backstory or character insight here is during their sit-down interview with Tad, and it's maybe, like a 2-3 minute scene, if that, in Tad's apartment towards the beginning of the movie. The rest of it, which I want to discuss a little bit when we talk about like points of view that you can get from within this narrative structure. It's not about getting to know any of these characters. It's just they're your audience characters. They're taking you through the story, and their decisions as they try to survive for 45, 50 minutes of this movie is the only real character arcs we get here, which is kind of an interesting way to structure your film, I think.
That and Reese knows jujitsu.
Oh, right. Little touches here and there, but one of the things I wanted to touch on before we kind of dive in on the movie as well was I guess maybe this is the first point in diving into the movie. This movie is an interesting example of how music creates a community. I mean, in this case, unfortunately, it's a hate-filled community of neo-Nazis, but that could easily go in a different direction. Picture like the Ain't Rights, like they do a hometown show in DC with like their friends are around and other bands that are around that are supporting them. That is a different type of community for them. And I think it's interesting. Actually, wait, yeah, since you were just mentioning kind of the blend that we were discussing the blend you get with like, far left politics and far right politics, or left wings and right wings here, you can get that within just like the punk music community very easily.
Yeah. There's a reason you have a song called Nazi Punks Fuck Off.
Right. When I was in college, I bounced between a few different cities here in Ohio, and there was one, I think it was when I was in Dayton, I went to Cincinnati because there was somebody at a music store was like, oh, there's this venue down there. They do a bunch of really good punk shows. I was like, oh, sweet. And the flyer for it was, it like basic ska imagery, like that two-tone black and white suspenders, fedora kind of imagery. And so my roommate and I went down to Cincinnati to check out this band that was playing. And, we had grabbed a drink. We were waiting for the band to start up, and we realized there was this group hanging out on one whole side of the bar. It was like at least a dozen guys or so. And you got like the Suspenders, the Doc Martens. My roommate pointed out like some of those dudes have red laces in their Doc Martens. Usual skinhead shtick from back then. I was like, wait a minute, what's this band about? What's going? And this was like late 90s, so it wasn't like we could just whip out our smartphones and like figure out what's going on here. And then it starts up, and it ends up being it's like some shitty like oi skinhead kind of band, and we're like, let's get the fuck out of here. I'm not here for this particular situation. But then flash forward to like nowadays, and I remember discussing with friends of mine who are on the political left, talking about the era of Trump and how there's this whole vibe within the punk community of how in 2015, 2016, how Trump would be the most punk rock president was like an actual discussion going on within the punk community, just even around like the Cleveland space I was around. I was like, wait, what? That's kind of fucked up. Like, what are you talking about?
It's completely fucked up.
Right. But it's like that. I don't know if it's like just that teenage punk thing where you haven't really thought things through yet. And you're like, yeah, let's just burn it, throw a Molotov cocktail in the Capitol and let's burn this down. That's what he would be like. He would trash this whole place. And
well, it's depoliticized. I mean, part of it is it's thoroughly depoliticized punk music, right? Like, I mean, punk has a deep political tradition to it, but not all of it is. Usually I associate with anarchism. But like that's, I mean, I didn't hear anything like that, but I wasn't really around, the kids with that. That's just confused.
Right. And it did steer towards younger people.
Yeah.
But there was that space. You could find it around online and, Reddit and SoundCloud and all kinds of stuff. It's full of like, oh God, this song's okay. But then you read the lyrics, you're like, what? No.
Well, part of it is, that's sort of the fashification of stuff, right? Like,
yeah,
that's your irony meme bullshit. Like, yeah, but you're not being ironic. You're actually just a fascist.
But within the scope of this movie, though, you've got this concert venue, and you see everything from like people that are just there for the show, up through Darcy, Patrick Stewart's character, who's in charge here, and you don't get a sense. You get a sense as they drive into this venue that it's in the middle of nowhere. There's no real like city to speak of that we see around it. It's very isolated, backwoods kind of environment. It's kind of the only community that the people at the show seem to have. So I don't know if it's like, this is the only community you can find, or once you have it, you just kind of go along with it. I think once you see the Patrick Stewart character, Darcy, come in, you realize what I don't want to say charmer, but like the power of influence he has. And can't have over somebody who's impressive.
He has charisma. I mean, there's a reason we should talk about Patrick Stewart's performance here in a moment, but there's a reason you get Patrick Stewart for this. Let's real quick before we go any farther. So we're in the Pacific Northwest. Let's just talk a little bit about fascism in the Pacific Northwest, because I know you did some review on this. I mean, this is a hotbed for fascistic for neo-Nazi politics and so forth.
Absolutely. I kind of was curious to ask you, of all the places you could pick to set this movie, I think you set it in the Pacific Northwest for a reason, which you just mentioned and we'll get into. But what are the what ifs here? Where else could you have set this movie? If you want a punk band versus like Nazis or racists or, white supremacist, ethno-nationalist kind of things, could you have done the South? Like you could do a backwoods venue in like Mississippi somewhere, right?
Here's what's interesting. So this movie comes out in 2015, 16. It's basically, it's in the Trumpian moment, but it in a certain sense, it naturally speaks to it, but it's actually talking about a dynamic that would be like, could happen today, but is at home, I don't know, in the 80s, right? Like even the late 70s or 80s, punks versus Nazis, so the punk rock scene is not, the punk rock, punk is like a subculture which is continued and certainly exists. And also neo-Nazi culture obviously is something that continues to exist, and red laces and all of this. I don't know what shape it's in. There's so many other types of fascism at this point in this sort of the era of the alt-right. I don't really know where like the neo-Nazi movement itself fits in. Obviously it's there, and it's very much, it's probably doing better than it has in a while, but they're the harder edge. Like your Proud Boys want some deniability about what they are.
Yeah.
Are they fascists? Yes, they are fascists. It's not a joke. Right. It's like obvious.
I think some of their deniability has come with mainstream platforming too, where it's like, oh, we gotta tamper this down because recruitment's possible now that we're getting some attention.
Exactly. And we want to lie with whatever.
Yeah.
Some Republican politician, something, so like open swastikas and stuff. This is like old school. This is old school a neo-Nazi scene, right? And its connections to metal, more metal than punk, I think, historically. Like metal has unfortunate long-term and current fascistic and Nazi overtones, which fits sort of with the aesthetic more so in some ways than punk always, but obviously yes, it exists in punk as well.
Well, punk and metal have overlaps where, like, if you're at a venue, like, you may have like a local metal band opening for a punk band. Like, it's similar genres, or maybe it's a little more hardcore than metal. Like, it's a little fuzzy there. But in this particular movie, they have another band that's kind of in contrast to the Ain't Rights called the Cowcatchers, which are listed or verbally described as, I can't remember if they say it in the movie or not, but it's definitely like in the press notes for this movie. They're described as an NSBM band, which is a National Socialist black metal band. Which is a rabbit hole I don't recommend people go down listening on the internet. But I tried a few, not my thing, just because I even know I can't discern the lyrics as they're going. I know what the intent is. And you're like, this hurts my soul. I can't listen to any more of this.
Well, they're Nazis. So
yeah.
So part of it is, but that's sort of, this is sort of a movie that's a little bit dislocated in time in a certain sense.
I see what you mean.
At the same time that it speaks. That at the same time that speaks to its moment, right?
Yeah.
It is clearly in the present. They have cell phones, but that sort of DIY punk culture thing is like something that just sort of continues, right?
Yeah.
It's not like the most vital part of everything, I guess, but like it's there.
And it's the world that these four main characters are existing in. They run out of gas. They have a siphon kit. They can go get some gas to keep their one, tour. They're all in one tour van going around. Playing these gigs.
Right.
It's interesting because you need isolation for this story to work.
You're asking where this movie could be.
Yeah. And
it could be anywhere.
It could.
That's rural, but I think the Pacific Northwest is the right place for it.
I do too. I was kind of playing the game like, as much as this works for me here, and for some of the reasons I was going to mention here, it's sort of a what if scenario. Like, this would also be kind of an interesting story. It'd be a completely different story but like say you set it in like an after hours city environment, like, you know, you do find a bunch of skinheads in the punk scene in like Chicago, and it's at 3 a.m. on like the empty streets of Chicago as they're being chased down or what, you know, it would, again, it would be a very different movie, but I was going through some of those what if scenarios with this one. I think it was just like the most perfect setting to go with the Pacific Northwest, because there's such a history to it there as well. As much as we think of, I don't know, like progressive bastions of like Portland or Seattle or whatever, the Pacific Northwest also, you know, has a huge neo-Nazi white supremacist culture that is a huge problem up there as well.
I mean, Portland is a hyper segregated city that like kept out black people. Like it's, you know.
Well, right. So one of the things as I'm looking through some of the stuff here, you've got Oregon has black exclusion laws that date back to 1884, 1844 that I was reading about. And I was like, Aaron, you went back too far. We're talking about Green Room. This is not a history of, you know, the fascistic Pacific Northwest. But, you know, when you start with that way back when, there's a precedence for these assholes to reference when they're starting to, like, in the 80s, there was a thing called the Order, that they had fears of extinction of the white race and its great replacement theory type shit, which is still with people out there in that particular region right now, which sucks. There's another group called just the Aryan Nations that was in Idaho from the 70s up till now-ish. The Order actually has an interesting, like they were around for like barely a year, but the influence was felt for a while, like Randy Weaver of Ruby Ridge fame. He moved his family to Idaho in the 80s because he was attracted to what the Order was talking about at gun shows and in pamphlets and on shortwave radio. You're like, oh, Jesus. Okay, well, this is clearly trying to pull people out here. The current one that I was reading a lot about is called The Base, which is an interesting, I don't know if that's irony at work. Isn't that the English translation for Al Qaeda?
Kind of, yeah.
Yeah, so they're called The Base. They started in 2019. Wonder what maybe prompted that. And they're still around right now, pulling in this whole, like, we need to establish, oh, fuck, what's the name? I'm trying to get my note here real quick. The Northwest Territorial Imperative is what it's called. And it's this idea, which didn't start with the base. This started back in the 70s. White supremacist movement that's really looking at, you know, Washington State, Idaho, I believe, like, what's it there? Montana is around, like, let's get all the whites here.
They want to create an ethno state.
To create an ethno state, essentially, yeah.
Yeah.
So like, oh, yikes. There's actually, just to keep it film based, there's a documentary called Welcome to Leith, Leith. It's a documentary, and it follows a group trying to set up, like, we got to get our crew, our all white crew, to move to this town. And they're trying to take over a town. So they have their, like, woohoo, we have our ethno town. Then we can move on to creating our own ethno state. It's pretty fucked up.
So all of this makes a lot of sense, right? There's a reason this is out there.
Well, so then the most recent thing to worry about, aside from the base being alive and active right now, is this shit called the Northwest Nationalist Network, or 3N is what they call it. A lot of this is on, like, the Southern Poverty Law Center and, you know, the usual folks, anti-defamation leagues that are doing great work to kind of document these groups and kind of follow their movements and what they're doing. They've set up these thing called active clubs now, which is basically white supremacist fight clubs, but they're called active clubs. So it doesn't have, like, the ring of, like, we're the KKK, or there's no, like, you know, white or supremacy or the word Nazi around them. Right. Their goal is to have, quote, decentralized fraternal white brotherhood groups. But they don't really say that. It's more about, like, survivalist mentality and training. Yeah. I wonder what they're training for. And then they meet up in person and they keep their online presence to a minimum. And so I think it was the ADL calls them, like, Fight Club for White Supremacists. And they are popping up in little groups here and there. So they're very loosely, well, again, decentralized. They're very loosely organized. But reading some of the, like, a sort of undercover or embedded reporting on it, it sounds like you could join one and be just like, oh, I want to better myself. I want to get in shape. I want to learn some, you know, survival stuff or whatever, and not really know you're joining an overt fascist white supremacist organization until a few months into it. Like, it's pretty low key to recruit. And then once you're, like, quote unquote in, you kind of start finding out a little bit more about what it's about. But by then it's kind of like possibly your identity. It's your whole social structure. It feels very akin to, like, the movie and how Patrick Stewart's running his group here.
I mean, this is I think this is classically how they recruit, workouts and stuff. I have a friend who actually ended up having to save a friend from a Nazi workout routine, basically. Ooh. Right.
right? Where they, and it was actually a good routine, right? Like it was a good system, but it was designed to like get you into this culture.
Yeah. Now, like if you get into yoga, you could be one step away from joining a QAnon cult in some areas. Like it's really weird.
I mean, part of it, QAnon is a more organic fascism and a certain American fascism than like neo-Nazis. I mean, obviously these are as American as apple pie, but in the sense that it's like you're not borrowing like a German thing. It's your own crazy insane cult thing. I mean, that's part of it. Is we're living in the era of proliferations of fascistic ideologies, sort of cultivated by the Trumpian thing, which is just the memeification of Trump has been really sort of a disaster. I see a lot of people, leftist friends or whatever, who treat him too much as a joke at this point, and it's like this is very dangerous.
You said you mentioned your friend and the Nazi workout routine.
Yeah. I mean, this is how they recruit, and it's a sort of thing that like the left needs to do a better job at. I mean, obviously, there's elements of that, and the left, the radical left, is in many ways a subculture or various subcultures, which I don't like. But creating social spaces and things that people can do is like really important, and all this stuff feeds into sort of hypermasculinity and things that create identity of for young men specifically. I mean, it's this is exactly how it happens. Music scenes are like a classic, is a long-standing version of this stuff, right? Like
right. And generally speaking, like you can have the organic music scene. Like if I'm into certain types of music, like I said, when I was going through college, I would seek out where like I was still am, into punk and hip hop. So I would look for venues that were playing that kind of a music. So you'd have that as kind of a loose thing. Like I would start recognizing people because after you go to 3, 4, 5, a dozen shows, you kind of recognize a few people. So you can start talking about the bands, and a community can organically form there. Or, I mean, okay, this is a really weird transition, but look at the current takeover of the music space by Taylor Swift and the Swifties. Like that is its own traveling economy now when she's going and playing, shows in different cities and whatever. But you have that on a smaller scale going on within Green Room at Patrick Stewart's venue here. But he also has like this hierarchy on top of it that you get to see play out, where you could probably just go there and see a band and not be part of his, skinhead gang.
Well, it's the recruitment space for them.
But it's the recruitment space for them, 100%. And you get to see it in these little tiny bits throughout the movie. Like once the plot has really kicked into gear and they're trapped in the Green Room, Anton Yelchin character, he gets off like a 911 call about a stabbing before the phone is grabbed and they're hung up. So Patrick Stewart's like, well, fuck, the police know about that. Someone's on their way. We need a stabbing. So he gets a couple of twins who are very, low on the rank, but probably want to work their way up in this organization to stab each other so that when the cops arrive, there is a stabbing. And that can be the distraction technique here. So you see that there is a trusted group within this musical venue space that does have a hierarchy.
Oh no, we totally see it. I mean, his sort of the basically the guy who does a lot of the managing on the ground does not have his laces yet, right?
Oh, Gabe,
he's not the guy played by Macon Blair. Gabe, he gets his laces by doing these things, but he's also like doesn't really trust him because he thinks he's a nincompoop.
He kind of has that vibe the way he plays it. Like he doesn't play it as like a tough, bulky, heavy dude. I don't know. He always just kind of had a vibe of like, is this guy really into it? But also the situation is escalating out of control very quickly.
So our inciting incident for things to spiral out of control is the murder of a young woman by one of the sort of inside guys and by one of the inside Nazis, I think presumably because they figure out that she's going to leave with another one of the sort of, I think, red laced up guys who's the cousin who gets them the gig. So part of what it speaks to is, once you're in, they don't want you out. I mean, basically, I think Darcy poisons the drugs.
Yes.
Yeah, he poisons the drugs of the guys who actually do the killing. I mean, he wants to take out anyone who knows about what actually happened.
Yeah.
He's covering his ass. This is a very tight ship. It's a like with a lot of sort of neo-Nazi stuff, is actually, they make their money drug dealing.
Right. Yeah, we get to the basement of the club at one point and you see like, oh, here's where drugs are manufactured.
Right. So it's a drug dealing operation. I mean, all this sort of fits, right?
Yeah.
With the sort of what you'd expect. But I think you're right. I think one of the things that this movie does is very quick world building. That's very effective for showing sort of the neo-Nazi space that we're in and how the hierarchies work, which plays a role in how everybody acts.
But very organically as the narrative unfolds. There's not like the only exposition scene, which I'm usually on the lookout for, is I think the interview at the beginning with Tad and the Ain't Rights, but it also fits perfectly because when you're on tour and you arrive at the new venue or the new location, that might be something you do.
Right.
And it pays off because during Tad's interview, he asks all of the punks and the Ain't Rights, Desert Island band. Like, what's the band you're going to listen if you're stuck only listening to one band on a desert island? What do you listen to? And they posture and they're, DIY, I'm never selling out, punk credentials in what they pick. And that pays off later on in the movie when they're looking at their own mortality and we may not make it out of here. What are you really picking?
Madonna and Prince.
Yeah. Fuck it, Prince, I think is actually one of the guy's lines, which just cracks me up. But then you stop cracking up because you realize, oh, you're heading to your death. This is maybe not that funny.
I mean, we sort of, they paint the crew. I mean, I think so. Yeah, so they realize they're going to have to fight their way out of there because I mean, everybody's sort of like scrambling, improvising, including the Nazis, right? I mean, it's a mess. The whole thing with the gun. Basically, they end up in a room with one of these guys with a gun.
What room is it, Isaac?
It's a green room.
It's the green room.
It's the green room. And they end up, Darcy has them get the gun because I guess he wants their fingerprints on it.
I think so, is how he's kind of working at it. Well, okay, this is actually a good lead-in because you want to talk about Patrick Stewart specifically. And this scene, watching it this time, just blew my mind in a certain regards of how it's edited. And I didn't notice it when I'd watched it before. This negotiation between the door. So it's Patrick Stewart, Darcy on the outside who has arrived. He's in charge. He's, the kingpin here. And then the band is on the inside with one Nazi, Big Justin. I think he's the one who did the stabbing, actually, the killing. So you've got the band in the room with one Nazi and then everybody else outside the door, which is locked. It's got a sofa in front of it. It's barricaded in. You don't see Patrick Stewart negotiating with these folks, but you hear him. They don't cut back and forth to him outside the door, pacing, thinking anything. You just hear him, and you hear Patrick Stewart's voice, and he is so commanding, but not forceful. He is a master negotiator, and you realize, oh, this guy can recruit. Because he gets the Ain't Rights, who all kind of acknowledge, I don't want to hold the gun. I don't want a gun. I don't even know what to do with a gun. Right. He negotiates to get them to hand the gun out the door.
So one thing, so like it's the Ain't Rights are in there, and then it's Imogen Poots' character.
Oh, I'm sorry,
character,
yes. Yeah.
Who seems to be Nazi adjacent.
Emily is the dead girl.
Right.
She's in with the Nazis, and this is just her friend. So she was like along with her friend, maybe just to see a show, but also her friend was on her way out. Like she was leaving the group with her boyfriend, who is definitely in the group.
Well, but she's sort of she knows all the people involved. She knows the scene. Right.
But you could know the scene and not necessarily be like active there. But you're also like, you know of them enough that you're in the green room with the group.
But there's the whole discussion about how the people who hurt her weren't white. Like part of it is that nobody in the band trusts or likes her because, I mean, she's not fully in ideologically, but she's not fully out. She's hanging around she's the type of person who's going to circle around it. Mind you, with the sort of ultra masculine nature of this sort of stuff, it doesn't seem like they have a lot of room for incorporating in women into their scene.
Not in a power structure at all, but but also I feel like she's just as dead as the band is because she's around this.
Oh, she's totally. Yeah, they're going to kill her. They're all thrown together.
Yeah. And it wasn't a sanctioned murder either. Like Patrick Stewart is like, what the fuck? You don't kill someone in my venue.
Yeah. No. That's just it. It's a complete. I mean, this is what happens when you have a bunch of sociopaths in here.
Yeah.
and addict Nazis, right? I mean, that's the thing.
That's
these
true.
guys. Yeah. So, they have to fight their way out. I mean, it helps she actually knows how to use a gun.
And a box cutter.
Jesus.
Oof, yeah. So Patrick Stewart, he negotiates through the door to get the gun handed over. Like, he's just that good. But also, you don't see him there. And I'm like, I want to see some Patrick Stewart. Why does he work so well, other than he's an amazing actor, in this role?
It's countercasting. We know that Patrick Stewart is not full of hate.
Like, what if Mel Gibson buzzed his hair and played this part? I'd be like, yeah, you probably really agree with a lot of this stuff. I don't know. Like, you know what I mean? Like, you could have, it has extra punch because Patrick Stewart is espousing all this, racist, hate-filled shit.
Well, it's Fonda in Once Upon a Time in the West. It's not who you.
Yeah. Yes, you're right. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
We don't expect this from you.
I think it's interesting. So I think he does a good job with this. Obviously, his presence. Part of it is you need somebody who will just be absolute presence, who can keep. Part of it is you need somebody who will keep these guys in line, right? Who's
Yeah.
going to intimidate them? And he's not going to do it physically.
No.
It's that he's smart and he's just in charge and he's, their ideological leader. It's, I think, what's interesting about it is we're so used to British actors who have an English accent, an American accent down perfectly. And I actually don't think he quite has it the whole time.
Oh, really?
Oh, I don't think it's not that he slips into an English accent, but it's not like a fantastic American accent, but it doesn't really matter. Like,
true. I mean, I wasn't really listening for it and it seemed fine, but
maybe I don't know what the generational stuff on this is, but I feel like certainly recent generations of British actors all learn how to have perfect American accents but maybe Patrick Stewart's generation, like, he's a stage actor, like they didn't, but I mean, he's fine. His presence, the gravity that he creates in the room just by not being who he is, but by his acting skills makes Darcy a terrifying figure as he like slowly, kind of methodically, kind of like pulling it out of his ass, tries to figure out how to kill these people and then make it disappear. Because he's going to try to frame them, make it look like self-defense, which speaks to the fascistic nature of American cultures and laws of self-defense, right?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's because everything he's doing is operating, quote unquote, within what he thinks he can get away with within the law.
Right. I mean, this is a very
the first plan is to send in, not necessarily the first plan, but one of his plans is one of the guys has a bunch of dogs.
Yeah.
A bunch of pit bulls, a bunch of fight dogs. And he doesn't just send in like the two trigger happy guys right away because he wants to make it look like we're acting in self-defense. These people, like their prints are on this gun, all this stuff. So yeah, it's like, it's so methodical and everyone just knows what that he's in charge and what to do. And then as you see the situation devolve, because he's making it up as he goes along, same as the band is, it gets more and more desperate and like, all right, if I just go in and blow him a fucking way, I don't care. Because he's also trying to salvage, the actual location, the operation, everything. Until as we get towards the end, he's more of the opinion of just like go in and shoot him, and then one step before just burning the whole place down, basically.
God, there are a lot of English actors in this movie. Anyway, right. And meanwhile, I mean the band. I mean, none of them. You have Reese, who has some jujitsu skills, which they do utilize.
Which really just like the choke out, I think, right?
Well,
he has in a hold position on the floor.
Yeah. Well, the thing is that he knows jujitsu, which means he probably doesn't know striking.
Right.
He basically said, like, you need to get him. I mean, he's in good shape. Like, he's very strong. Yeah. But the thing is, he needs to get the guy on the ground before he can dominate him.
Yeah. Because the guy's on the ground is named Big Justin for a reason. He's a big dude, but Reese has got him once he's on the ground. But then there's also, it's interesting, that's a ticking time bomb too, because you can't hold that guy forever.
Well, right. I mean, you either have to break his arm or not, which he does do. But
I was going to say, until he's given permission, like, okay, it's that bad, break his arm. He needs to be incapacitated.
Yeah. No, but I mean, like, in jiu-jitsu, you're going to learn how to get somebody on the ground. But like, still, it's like, this is a very real situation, not a tournament. And then by and large, I mean, it's sort of like enough of them die so quickly just from bewilderment. I mean, one of the realistic things about this, to a certain degree, and certainly in the beginning of it, is like they're just regular people. They are not prepared for this at all.
Oh, yeah.
And the most dangerous thing they face is the dogs.
Yeah.
Do the dogs kill 3 of them?
I don't remember the count. It's at least 1, maybe 2. Okay, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think Alia Shawkat's character gets killed by a dog.
Okay, it might be 3 of them then.
Well, no, Reese gets killed because he gets out. I mean, he runs for it, gets out. But the problem is they're covering all the exits, so he gets nailed that way.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
So, I mean, to a certain degree, this movie relies on shot kills, right?
Right. Which is interesting because Jeremy, the director, he talks on the commentary track about using moments of silence because you can't just do shock, shock, shock. You need to have like these breathing moments, but also you want to keep an air of realism in it. So as they're trying to figure out what to do, you want to give these characters moments of silence. So anytime there's a shock moment in this movie, it's preceded by like a moment of silence where something is being thought about or just kind of these quiet moments in there. And I think we alluded to it earlier, but Imogen Poot's character, they have Big Justin, the Nazi, in the room, and there's clearly a moment where it's definitive. Okay, we have to kill this guy, period. And it's totally silent. The band members all kind of looking at each other, and like none of them are killers, and they're like, they're just like, I can't do that, no matter what kind of do or die situation we're in. And that's when Poot's character just opens up a box cutter and just opens up Big Justin.
Well, sort of. So part of what's going on is that Reese has got him in, I think, a triangle choke, and is attempting to kill him, but he may never have knocked anyone out with a triangle choke. It's not something I don't think you normally like pass people out intentionally. People tap out if you're in sports.
Right. Yeah.
So he doesn't actually know how long it takes to kill the guy by choking him.
Oh, right. Because they think he's out, but
yeah, they think he's out, but he's not actually dead. He starts to come up and she just slits his belly open.
Yeah.
Which is, I think, our second shocking thing.
And it's awesome because what he's doing with these shocks here aren't like, and then a surge of music and like, oh my God, look at this. It's just, it happens.
Right.
Which in itself,
there's no cues.
Yeah.
And I think that's the trick here.
Yeah.
I mean, our first moment of shocking violence, I think, is Anton Yelchin, who we haven't talked about at all. I mean, obviously, he's great in this movie. He was great in everything he was in. I ever saw him in.
Yeah, I haven't seen a ton of his stuff, but I haven't seen a bad one yet. I mean, even if it's like a so-so movie, he's interesting in it.
Yeah, so it's it's always hard to watch that when you've got especially a young actor.
Yeah,
but his character, who's kind of the lead, but like you sort of it's this thing where like you sort of get cued that he's the lead, kind of, but like it's co-leading until it's a process of elimination.
I would say he's lead by process of elimination, but also because like it's a character or it's an actor in this.
Yeah,
but he's not playing like the lead singer; he's playing the bassist,
right?
Which is interesting. So it creates it's a very kind of group decision making process, as we see with the band for the most part. But you see by default, they do kind of look to him. So I don't know if he started the band or if it's considered like his. They don't really get into that because we don't get a whole lot of background on it. But he seems to be the one they look to.
He's the one who does the intellectual, the why don't we have an online presence because we're pretentious thing, because music is in the moment when
live.
Played, and
yeah,
it's like yeah, buddy, I know you're an artist, but he sticks his arm out
to hand him the gun, isn't it?
Well, to hand over the gun and then to take it back, and he just gets his arm sliced open at multiple points, and they end up taping it up with duct tape.
Just duct tape that.
And he's the one who, he has the paintball story, which they interrupt. And when it's down to him and just Putt's character, so basically, when they try to do their initial breakout, they get attacked by the dogs and driven back. I mean, that's, by these attack dogs, which are set off by German words, shockingly enough. And he finishes the story. I mean, it's about, fighting these, having a shootout with these Marines in paintball, and basically that you need to basically just go loose and become incredibly unpredictable and not give a shit if you're going to make it through something like this.
Yeah, if you have tactical Marines coming at you, they're going to beat you. But if you're just like the crazy wild person who just runs screaming and shooting paintballs, maybe you can win, which...
Right.
There's something to like the element of surprise and crazy, but...
So, and they sort of turn things around by becoming more unpredictable and by being more, I think more aggressive, right? In a certain sense, by being tricky and using little traps, but but it's also like, there's not that many Nazis who can be trusted to do this. So you kill a few of them.
Yeah. Well, also then that creates a situation, which I don't think is part of what they're talking through logistically or as a plan. But now Patrick Stewart's got more shit to cover up if he's going to be successful in covering this up, or you're just giving him more bodies to be like, well, this is why it was self-defense. They killed 3 people or whatever. So the character point of views in this movie are interesting. I was really trying to focus on Patrick Stewart and his skinhead gang here. on this viewing to see like what the dynamics were. But also the interesting dynamic, the initial interesting dynamic here is really the band, because they're taking you through the story. And one of the things that you love pointing out on the show, and you are correct on this, is looking for arcs, narrative arcs, character arcs, that sort of thing. And it's interesting in a movie like this where there isn't really character arcs to speak of. It's really just it's a survivalist story. Can they survive? Which again, I think does probably put it in a horror movie territory, because it's one of those, are these characters or any of them going to survive this incident?
I think Yelchin's character might have an arc of sorts, right? So he's the one who can't figure out what his desert island thing is. Is this him building confidence? Is this him becoming more decisive? I don't know.
It's not him revealing his desert island band, because we don't even hear it at the end, but
We don't, because who gives a shit?
that is
The loosest of arcs.
looseness. But it's interesting here because it has to do, I think, with the tension. There's something in the tension here that we, the audience, know, or at least I did, like I would be just as fucked as these kids are in this situation. So that to me gets my empathy going immediately, because I'm not with the Nazis. Obviously, I'd be with this punk band, and I too, when watching it, I don't see a way out of this. Like the negotiation clearly isn't going to work, because when we do see Patrick Stewart and his group on the other side of the door, this is not a negotiation to get them out of here. It is a negotiation to get rid of them, and it's not get them on the road, because that's not an option. But that also kicks into gear a very propulsive narrative that kind of takes over and guides us through the rest of the film. And it's not necessarily character development. I guess, like you said, we do get maybe the paintball story, a little thing here, an anecdote here and there, but we really don't know any backstory to like how the band started, how Pat, Sam, Reese, or Tiger got together. There's some vague character traits. I think one of them, I think it's Sam, Aaliyah Shawkat's character is kind of like the level-headed bureaucrat, like passing out the money, keeping track of the gig stuff, the directions, things like that. We get kind of like a hothead kind of character who's ready to go or be a little bit more confrontational. But that's also, it's enough to get us cheering for these kids to make it through the night, because I'm obviously not going like, but what about those Nazis? What about those skinheads? And maybe they have some humanity, or they have a point here at all. Like it's a fuck situation, and we're immediately just identifying with this band and cheering for them to get through the night.
Right.
So I think that's it's an interesting way to construct your narrative, where I don't need any of that backstory. It feels whole and fully realized just to be a survival story.
Right. We've gotten just, there's enough economy here that we've gotten just what we need.
Yeah.
To have a sense of who everybody is and what we, I think, maybe Tiger, who's actually the lead singer, probably gets the least in a sense, but like, everybody gets enough. Yeah. No, I think, yeah. Well, this is why this is such an effective movie.
Indeed. Well, I have a question though, based on that point of view kind of idea. Do you think there are like Nazi punks out there that watch this movie and cheer?
Ah, the big test, right?
Yeah. Does this play in a fascist punk scene, the way like I'm picturing Spike Lee's Black Klansman, when the Nazis or the Klan are all sitting around watching Birth of a Nation and cheering?
Well, I mean, part of his Birth of a Nation is like their propaganda, literally.
Well, fair enough. Okay, ignore that version. But I just meant like
it's the American History X test.
There we go.
Which is basically, do you make them look cool? And it's a very difficult, not very difficult, but it's something that gets fallen into a lot. The most effective thing to do in this situation is to do a producer's maneuver, which is you turn them into a joke, right? Mel Brooks knew exactly what he was doing here. Making them into a joke is how you demystify them, right? You take away their aura.
Yeah.
I think, certainly they're intimidating. Darcy is, like Patrick Stewart is intimidating, whatever. But, they die bloody.
Right.
And, I don't know. But I don't think this is a movie. I don't think this is a movie where they're going to walk away going like, yeah, that's what I want to be. Unless you're like really into it and want to work with it. It's like, no, like a lot of them are pretty fucking stupid. They're drugged up. They're kind of, they're not like unusually stupid, but they're doing stupid shit.
Right. And they don't make it because, even Patrick Stewart by the end gets a very like kind of brutal, but also kind of like unceremonious, just like shot in the head.
I want to talk about that actually.
Sort of thing. So if you want to do it as a celebratory watch in a Nazi fascist punk scene, you'd have to stop the movie at a certain point and be like, "Wow, wasn't that awesome?" Because like if you watch all the way through to the end, it's kind of one of those like, "Oh, all those characters I liked are dead now."
Yeah, I don't think it really works that
It doesn't
way.
quite work that way. Right.
Which is a real win because that happens, I think, a lot.
Yeah.
No, I want to talk about like that the ending. So they've broken out, and there's a symbolism of the poisoned dog. Why are they poisoning these dogs again? I think it's like they have to put them down after they've.
Yeah, it's part of Patrick Stewart's like plot of like cover up or whatever. Like the dog guy has to like sacrifice a dog or two, and he talks about how like I'll pay you back or whatever, and all of that.
But like so part of it is that they've made it out. They've killed the two Nazis who were supposed to finish them off, and there's not a lot of people around. So and they have a gun, so they're able to kill the two Nazis who were with Patrick Stewart, and they've got Patrick Stewart there. And Hood's character basically said, you were so much more frightening at night, or you're so much more intimidating at night.
Yeah.
And I think that, that is sort of an encapsulation, right? If there's a political point of sort of, the ways that sort of these fascist organizations or whatever, they create an aura, right? They create an aura of intimidation. They create an aura of organization, of community, of aesthetic that is appealing. They do all these things. But, once they're revealed in the day, they're pathetic and vulnerable. And so I think,
what a contrast to like talking to him through the door in the initial negotiation versus that final scene there.
Right. When his power is taken away,
mm-hmm.
What's left? Not a lot.
Not a lot. Not a lot. And actually, from the director's commentary, Jeremy even mentions the final. He says the final killing is ill-timed, brutal, and kind of sad. I don't know about the sad part, but I mean, I wasn't like.
Well, it is sad in the sense that, like,
oh, that's that.
Everybody's dead.
Well, okay, yeah, I get that part, I guess, but and again, there's no music cue. There's no like the music doesn't swell when the final Nazi gets popped in the head. It's just sort of like Patrick Stewart's kind of he turns his back and is like running away, and then just like boom, and then falls over dead. Which I like that approach too. I don't need it to be the big triumphant music. Yay, our fair character is off the last Nazi there.
Yeah, well, it's just a moment of exhaustion. And what do you even do with this?
Right. This might be a bigger topic than we want to jump into right now, but since you mentioned American History X, that was 1998, there is this trend of portraying Nazis, usually in American films, although actually I have a list on Letterboxd that has some UK and some Australian stuff as well. It's, I don't know, maybe that's worth talking about it in deeper on its own episode or something, but like you've got Green Room, you got American History X in 98. A couple years before that, you've got John Singleton's Higher Learning. We have Michael Rappaport, who goes to college and falls in with a bunch of skinheads. You've got The Believer in 2001, Ryan Gosling. That's even more complicated because he's got a Jewish background, Jewish family who gets into neo-Nazism. You've got Green Room, so, skip ahead a few years in 2015. The year after Green Room, though, you've got one called Imperium that Daniel Radcliffe, Harry Potter, has to go undercover to infiltrate, a white supremacist cell who's they think they're planning an act of terrorism, which is pretty similar to Black Klansman, 2018, the Spike Lee movie we were just talking about. And then I found another one I'd never even heard about, Jamie Bell, British actor, who is in it's a United States production called Skin, about a kid who's raised by racist skinheads, and he's got all the requisite tattoos, even face tattoos. And how do you move past hatred and violence when you outwardly look like what you are? All the symbols are like actually on your body. And then I found another one from 2020 called Becky, which I haven't watched, but it's got Kevin James in it.
Kevin James?
It's Kevin James, Lulu Wilson. There's even a sequel to it. Joe McHale is in there somewhere. And I think like white supremacy or Nazism is kind of on the background there, but it's around. But there's something with like this portrayal. I don't know I feel like it kind of really kicked off the American History X, even though like, Russell Crowe, Romper Stomper, that's the 90s, that's early 90s. I don't know. I'm not sure what to do with this, but it's an interesting thread in American cinema, again, that I don't really know what to do with, but it's like something I'm noticing there with.
I mean, we've talked about this, and we've talked about doing a series on this, which I don't think we really have time for right now. but I think it's something we should actually put in there to sort of like do a little watching on at some point, like work through some of these, because I don't totally understand it either, but it is like this weird semi-romanticized, semi-not, or like, they're bad, but also thing. I'm not really sure what's setting it off at that point, right?
Yeah, I'm not sure either.
I'm sure one of our listeners might know, but
well, and it's also like it's sort of maybe a duality thing, because like American History X, you've got the first half of the movie where you're like, look at these racist skinheads committing hate crimes and murder and going to jail for it, and then learning a lesson in prison, and then coming out and trying to re-enter society, family structures, back in your skinhead gang or whatever. Imperium, the one with Daniel Radcliffe, it's when he's going undercover, and I don't remember if it's a reveal. No, he's got like his badge on in the cover, but his head's shaved. So it's kind of like, it's almost like kind of an exploitation structure where it's like, let's go undercover and see these crazy racists and what their subculture's like. And kind of maybe for shock value to mainstream audiences. I don't know. Because that's also the story of Black Klansman. It's, can you infiltrate? Well, that one's kind of a comic angle. A black guy on the phone infiltrates, David Duke and the Klan locally, and then sends in Adam Driver as like his in-person persona to the group. But it's almost done as like comedy shtick in some scenes. And I don't know, that one's kind of fascinating. But it's all like, it's like infiltration stories almost is what they're leaning into.
Yeah. I mean, it plays into sort of crime infiltration stories as well.
It's good drama. I mean,
it's good drama, but I mean, so part of it is as a political statement or as a political vehicle for a set of ideas. I don't know. I want to watch more of these movies. This is not something I've really dug into very deeply. I don't know how they all handle it.
Yeah, we'll keep a pin in that idea, but it's floating around out there, and it's intriguing and interesting since it's a political cinema show here, but no answers just yet.
So I have a final question for you.
Are you going to ask me if this is a leftist film?
No,
that's my question for you, Isaac.
But yeah, I know that's why I'm not going to ask. How does this read as a Halloween film?
Well, I think just being in the horror genre, there's the horrors of white supremacists and organized groups of them lurking who knows where, but definitely out in the woods. It's not just Jason you got to be worried about out there in the woods. There's fascists and skinheads and neo-Nazis out there. So there's that horror element, the horror of these things just underlying American society that are there. And I guess there's actually like the body horror of what happens to various people. I mean, I don't give a shit about the Nazis getting killed or beat up or murdered, but the band that is slowly picked off is pretty gruesome.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not set on Halloween or anything, but it's in the general horror genre. Thriller horror, I think, on this one.
Sure.
But honestly, I think it's so well made. It's kind of almost in the prestige horror or art house horror, which we've covered previously.
I think it definitely counts within art house horror.
Yeah.
It's interesting. It's just, this is the first time we didn't really do a Halloween series this month, which is what we normally have historically done on the podcast.
But you've also been on record that we tended to we got a little too overscheduled with themes and months. So
exactly. Yeah. And this is also like it's a it's a little bit off of our usual thing, but yeah, I think it fits within art house horror definitely.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it fits for this podcast. But yeah, I was just sort of thinking it's like a very normally we've done pretty exclusively supernatural horror movies.
Oh, I'd have to go back and look. Actually, that's a good question. What we've normally been covering, but I mean, I think it fits within that realm. And so I recently got to see Goblin, the band, play the live score along with Demons here in Cleveland, and they did Suspiria last year and Goblin this year. And talking to other folks who are just exclusively horror nuts or horror hounds or whatever the thing is, I start getting in my head very judgy of people who are into certain types of horror. Like if you're wearing a Cannibal Holocaust t-shirt, like you're that into it, I want to talk to you about that. That's a little disturbing to me that you're that into that particular movie. And so I had friends that were with me. They were like, oh, I'm not really into horror. And then we start talking about it, and they love, some classic, like even some of the Hitchcock stuff that you could, is horror. You have Psycho, you've got Frenzy. There's some horror that he did. There's like the classic stuff of the 70s. There's the classic run of slasher movies. The main, Jason, Freddy, Michael Myers through the 70s and 80s, mainly the 80s. Scream fans that are in the 90s. There's all these different permutations of horror that are out there that aren't like the brand that I don't care for, which is like the Saw hostile torture porn stuff that's just sadism and violence for the sake of violence. I think this is one of those that you could watch and really enjoy, even if you're not quote unquote into horror. And I think that's also sort of what the prestige horror and the art house horror does. So I think this would fit in as a good October watch for any of those folks. But if you're kind of a Holocaust fan, you may be a little let down by the lack of excessive, gratuitous, exploitative gore that is not in this movie.
Wow.
But
I mean, I don't really. Yeah, I'm with you there. I mean, I think this is that it does rely on some shock value. It does rely on sudden brutality that you don't really see coming, but it's artfully done.
And in the purpose of, I think, a narrative. It's not shocking you just to shock you. It's shocking because you've developed a connection and you didn't want to see that character get their arm sliced open or get mauled by a dog or murdered.
I mean, it's also the suddenness of it.
Right. But like a killing in Saw with a crazy contraption, you're like, I don't want to see someone try to crawl through a room full of barbed wire or fall in a pit full of open used hypodermic needles. Like, that's shock. Just like, oh, look. You're like, you didn't earn this. Get the fuck out of here. That's me being judgy on other people's horror taste. But yeah. Anyway, I think I know the answer to this one. Is this a leftist film, Isaac?
Oh, do you? That's a really interesting question, actually. I'm not sure it is.
That's sort of how I was leaning.
Yeah. I don't think it actually is. I think what's interesting about it is that it takes a lot of things from leftist cultures, like anarchist punk rock scenes.
Sure.
And uses them. And it is, I think, anti-fascist, which is, always good.
That's a little bit of a bare minimum thing, though, too.
Right. I mean, thank God, right? In this day and age, you never really know.
That's true. Again, bare minimum still, but it's the least you could do is be anti-fascist in your movie. Let me muddy the waters a little bit with a follow-up statement to that question of is it a leftist film? On the director's commentary, Jeremy Saulnier, the director, says, and I typed this in here so that I had his actual quote, "I didn't really have political intentions with this story."
Yeah.
Does that take a little bit out of it then, or?
No, I think it actually makes perfect sense.
But I think he inherently, and I think that's the sort of what I love about the movies we sometimes find on the show is like finding, like we say in our opening, there's a political and artistic message in any film in any time period and in any culture. And I think he is actually saying something political by setting it in the Pacific Northwest and doing a punks versus Nazis story.
I think he's doing something political even though he doesn't necessarily want to. That's the thing, is like, I think it's actually that you've got histories and worlds of politics that you've got certain types of artists who want to use the aesthetics or the location or, like the scenery of it. That sounds a little more harsh than I want to be, but that means you can't help but actually deal with the politics of this thing that you're,
Mm-hmm.
Like, so I think, it because you chose this thing, yeah, it's going to be political. But I think, I just don't know how much intentionality there is there. And it doesn't sound like there's as much as one would hope.
Well, my only addition to that would be, he said this on a commentary track, which nobody listens to those anymore. I don't mean literally nobody, but it's like, it's a niche thing. I, listen to it because I, own physical media of this movie. If you're just watching this streaming somewhere, you don't have access to that. But on a commentary track is where you let your hair down a little bit. I think that's how the phrase goes. You might actually say, like, because he talks about his experiences touring as a punk band and how he took a lot of that stuff to, open the movie with these punks on tour sort of thing, falling asleep at the wheel, waking up in a cornfield, that sort of thing. We didn't actually run off the road in a mountain and die. We just went into a cornfield. Lucky us. That sort of stuff. I feel like the commentary track is where you would mention, like, well, I said it in the Pacific Northwest because it's known for, breeding ground for, white ethno-state Nazis and blah, blah, blah. And he specifically mentions
he doesn't.
He
doesn't.
Yeah.
And so I think, this is what I mean about using something that actually is politically adjacent scenery to make your movie.
Yeah.
And, this is sort of in an age in which when this movie came out, there was even less so, in which sort of the left, you can contrast it with their 50s, 60s, and 70s films, certainly outside of the United States, where like the left is in everything, whether it's a leftist film or not. In this case, it's the opposite, where you've got this sort of the echoes of something, but you don't actually need to deal with it. I mean, I think this goes back. It's the flip side almost of our first episode on Children of Men, where I don't know Cuarón's politics exactly, but it's very clear that I think he, in a lot of ways, he gets the politics and the left culture right in that film, and liberals aren't able to get it. And in this case, you sort of have the opposite, where the filmmaker doesn't necessarily get the politics, but is a good enough filmmaker that it works.
Yeah. And again, as a reminder, just because we're saying it's not necessarily a leftist film, it's a bad movie. It's just the question we ask because this is the show you're listening to.
And because it's punks versus Nazis, it can Trojan horse as a leftist film as needed, because...
And I think that keeps me from like that extra half star to just be like, fucking A, this is amazing. Or, as I mentioned in the previous episode, and that was the other question I wanted to ask you after our usual leftist question, is this movie better if, at a certain point in this movie, I think a great start of the third act reveal, Anton Yelchin's character is a werewolf. And he's pushed to the brink and werewolf's out at the end because he sees all of his friends murdered. And we get a surprise werewolf movie for the last 20 minutes. Better?
Yes. Absolutely.
I mean, I would definitely be cheering that on. That could be one of those like a bridge too far moments for other audiences, but at the same time, this movie was not a hit in theaters. I hope it finds an audience on streaming and nowadays, but limited budget, $5 million, grossed in worldwide box office was like almost $4 million. I remember it being well received and enjoyed when we were working at the art house and it played, but it clearly wasn't one of those like, oh, this is a hit, we need to keep this around. It was, oh, hopefully this will be a cult film over time. And
I'm not sure. I think it's sort of reached that status.
Think so?
Maybe. I mean, I feel like I should know this, but
I mean, it was on critics loved it. A lot of top 10 lists. Looking real quick here, Rotten Tomatoes 90%, Metacritic 79 out of 100. It has all the markings of becoming a cult movie, if nothing else. Actually, no, wait. You know what? There was a somebody programmed it. I forget what city it was, but they were doing one of their like horror marathons for Halloween. I think it was pre-pandemic, and their plug for including this movie was that it's an update on John Carpenter's Assault on Precinct 13, which they were playing it together on this like horror marathon bill. So you'd see Green Room, then Assault on Precinct 13. I don't know if they were back to back, but it was in the same lineup.
Interesting. I like that.
Okay, I like that. I would do that for sure. But that's Green Room from 2015. Well, actually, yeah, it's 15-16 because it played at the Cannes Film Festival spring 2015, but then it didn't come out in the United States until spring 2016. So to me, that's the 2016 movie because that's the first time I was able to see it. So, of course, I have to date it from when I had access to it. Green Room, definitely recommend, even if it's not truly, an out-and-out leftist movie. Isaac, what have we got up next?
Well, we're going to jump subject matters a little bit, though I think there may be some violence in this film. We are going to be talking about film and the 2008 financial crisis with 2012's Killing Them Softly.
Indeed. Andrew Dominic film, which we'll have to discuss him a little bit on that show. He's an interesting director coming out of New Zealand. He did one called Chopper way back when, but most recently he did Blonde, which doesn't get any love from anybody as far as I've seen. I didn't read too many. I read 3 or 4 reviews for that when it came out and went right to Netflix, but it got ravaged, which is not the case with Kill 'Em Softly. It was pretty well praised, and I adore it. And if you're curious as to how we're tying that into the 2008 collapse with a Brad Pitt starring gangster movie from 2012, tune in next time to find out. But before we officially sign off, be sure to rate and review the show in whatever podcast app you are using. And if you do enjoy the show, tell a friend or 2 or 3. And if you love the show and feel so inclined, we have a Patreon page set up. Just see the links in the show notes for all of that worthwhile information. Until next time, I am Aaron.
And I am Isaac. And right now, as we speak, the Israeli military is preparing a ground invasion of Gaza, and well over 2,000 Gazan civilians have died. Obviously, this is maybe Israel has taken the highest number of deaths in the opening of this particular round of conflict in its history. But right now, what we're seeing is the potential for genocidal action in Gaza, which is an internment camp, a concentration camp, functionally, a city-sized concentration camp. And what we're seeing is the culmination of the failures or the unrealistic expectations that somehow Palestinians would lay down and die and not resist by many different means, many peaceful protests in which people were murdered or crippled, strikes, stone throwing, and Hamas's ultimate, attack on Israeli society. But that somehow Palestinians would lay down and die and disappear, and that is just not true. But we are in danger of a second Nakba, that is the ethnic cleansing of the Palestinians in 1948 during the creation of the state of Israel, born out of ethnic cleansing. And like many states, to be honest, this is a terrifying moment, and it's an extremely dangerous moment. And right now, the Israelis have nearly a blank check to do things which, already UN officials, everyone's saying is just impossible, right? Ordering 1 million people to flee and then bombing the routes that they're going in. So, to say stay safe out there seems ridiculous. It's not safe. It's a kill box the size of smaller than Northeast Ohio with 2.3 million people in it. And if you can go out and protest, if you can do anything, even contact your politicians, anything, this is the time to do it, because this is a very, very dangerous situation. This Israeli government is the most right-wing in history. They have carte blanche from Israeli society to do whatever. And so far from Israel's patrons, specifically the United States. And, they've openly talked about ethnic cleansing, and, they've killed far more Palestinians in this attack in just a few days than a month in previous wars. So, be active, be out there.